There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between radio and bar talk, between commentary and recaps, and it lies between the pit of man's Netflix subscriptions and the summit of his binge-watching ability. This is the dimension of podcasting and the Twilight Zone. These are the Zone-i-Sodes. And now your hosts, Brandon Davis and Scott McFarland.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome to the Front Row Movie Reviews, the podcast for people who actually like movies and TV. And welcome to episode 24 of Zone-i-Sodes, our retrospective of all 156 wonderful episodes of the Twilight Zone from the 1950s and 60s. My name's Scott McFarland, and with me, as always, on this journey through the fifth dimension is...
Brandon Davis, and I'm not quite sure what dimension I'm in right now, but I'm here.
It's late at night. Just go with it. It may be the 10th dimension for all you know. But I will point out Brandon is legally high, not illegally high. So it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay.
He's just high on life. Today we're going to be talking about a really old history professor in the guise of the Long Live Walter Jameson. I'll start out with a little synopsis, and we'll see what Rod had to say, and we'll run from there.
Okay.
So Walter is a history professor that has a knack for making his lectures seem as so real, his students think he actually was there when it happened. His future father-in-law, Samuel, agreed after Sam finds a picture of Walter from the Civil War. Walter confesses that not only was he in the Civil War, but he has been alive for over 2,000 years. After this confession, Walter returns to his home to find one of his many past wives, Loretta, that is waiting for him. She doesn't want Walter to marry his fiancée, Susanna, because it will destroy another person's life. She shoots Walter and flees. Sam finds Walter rapidly aging as he passes away. Susanna then comes into the room to find a pile of dust where Walter once stood.
And here's what Rod has to say. You're looking at Act 1, Scene 1 of a nightmare. One not restricted to witching hours or dark rain-swept nights. Professor Walter Jameson, popular beyond words, who talks of the past as if it were the present, who conjures up the dead as if they were alive. In the view of this man, Professor Samuel Kittredge, Walter Jameson has access to knowledge that couldn't come out of a volume of history, but rather from a book on black magic, which is to say that this nightmare begins at noon.
So, Brandon, let's talk about your first impressions of Long Live, blah, blah, blah. This is going to be a tongue twister. Long Live Walter Jameson.
This is one I think I remembered seeing before on, I think it was Sci-Fi Channel. A really, really interesting premise. I didn't quite remember everything about it. I just remember Kevin McCarthy because I think he's a really, really good actor. Probably best remembered for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but
and best remembered for the iconic face that he has. You see that thing everywhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But really, really solid episode. And we kind of talked about last week with World of Difference, where they tried to cram so many characters into a short 25-minute space. In this episode, it's really 3-4 characters, and that's it. And it tends to work better that way, I feel like. And, a really, really sort of interesting premise. This is kind of, I kind of like the episodes where Rod deals with, time travel and, history and sort of works it into that. So this is a really, really, really interesting episode for me. And, I think the performances are good. It's got a few weaknesses, which we'll talk about later. But I think overall another solid outing from the Twilight Zone in a very strong first season.
Yeah, I agree. And it's this is one of the few that actually isn't written by Rod. He doesn't even have any writing credit with this one. This is Charles Beaumont who wrote this. He also wrote quite a few other ones that are probably more well-known even than this, including The Howling Man, Miniature, Printer's Devil, and Number 12 Looks Just Like You, which we'll talk about all of those down the road. But yeah, this is one of those that it shows up quite a bit, but whenever I see this episode, I actually I'm reminded of one of my favorite films, and it's actually a film that probably no one has seen because it was very much independent, and it was made based on a stage play that was actually written by the book that the stage plays were based on was written by Jerome Bixby. Jerome Bixby is also the writer of It's a Good Life, another Twilight Zone episode that we'll be dealing with here down the road. But that film is called The Man from Earth, and this idea that a person could be immortal, whatever that may be, and the study of how a person deals with that. And that's kind of always kind of fascinated me. And the idea that, usually people have a certain amount of years, and so because of that, our entire life is based around those certain amount of years. So going off one of the topics that's dealt with here is marriage. When you know that your partner is probably going to live to be about the same age as you, then you can assume that there's going to be wedlock that goes on for the whole life of the two people. But when you have one of those people who knows for a fact that they're going to live much longer than their partner, how does that get dealt with? And we obviously deal with that quite a bit here. But the other thing that's interesting, and I don't think this episode hits on, but that movie hits on, I don't know why I'm talking more about a movie than I am the episode, but it's a really good movie, you should go check it out, is when a person has the ability to move through time like that and just be able to survive through all of that, they have a kind of a Forrest Gump effect where you're going to be involved in things that happen throughout history. For example, Walter was one of the staff members for General Sherman, and so he was very much involved in the Battle of Atlanta and the March to the Sea. So it's interesting to see how one person, if they're giving enough time on this earth, what they can do with it and how interactive they can be in their history that's going on around them. And I think this episode, for only having 25 minutes to do it, does a pretty good job with it.
Yeah, and that's just that when I watch this episode, every time I see it, I always think about, oh man, to have lived from the Civil War all the way up to when this episode takes place in 1960, that's 100 years of time that he spends as an adult, and just the things that you would see and the events that you would witness through that time. I mean, it's just interesting to even think about. That's why I think this episode kind of appeals to me as well, because I love history, and so just to think about someone who lived through all that is just a cool idea.
Yeah, I agree with you there too. I'm a huge history buff, and my undergrad degree, which I don't use at all, is a history degree. And I would have loved, in the few times I taught high school history, the very few times, I would have loved to have that knowledge to be able to kind of be more of a storyteller than have to be a lecturer. And that really truly only comes from you experiencing the event firsthand. And so that's an interesting thing. I think it's smart that that Samuel, an elder person, is kind of tipped off by just the ability for Walter to be able to explain to these people what happened, like he was almost there. And then, of course, we go into the fact that he also understands that Walter isn't aging. But it's an interesting idea of what happened. I mean, and you can almost kind of imagine in the writer's room somebody just making the pitch, what happens if your history teacher was alive in the Civil War? And they just ran from there. Yeah. So, Brandon, what are some of the scenes that you liked, or some of the aspects of the show you liked?
Well, I love the relationship between Walter Jameson and Sam. I love the interesting to me how Walter's lived this long and yet allows Samuel Kittredge to kind of be this sort of elder mentor to him, where he's lived 50, 60 years longer than Kittredge has. And I think that they have a really good relationship. And I think that's one of the strengths of this episode. The scene that they have together where Samuel's figuring out, exactly how long Walter Jameson's lived and that he's the guy in the picture and everything, that plays out. That's a very lengthy scene. And it feels like almost half the episode. And so the fact that that gets to play out as long as it does really is one of the strengths of this episode, that these characters really feel developed, unlike other episodes that we could talk about. But I think Kevin McCarthy, as I mentioned, is a very strong actor, and I think he plays it very subtly the whole time. He plays it like a guy who's lived 100 years in a younger guy's body. He has a very statesmanly quality to him. Throughout the whole. Yeah,
I agree with you, and part of that is he's got that kind of Reed Richards type, just white temples that always reads to me as a scholarly, experienced person. That works out pretty well there. And I agree with you too on the character piece. I think I complained about this with the last episode, World of Difference, and I think this one does it much better, and that is, again, the tempo of the episode. You really only have 3 set pieces in this entire episode. You've got the classroom, you've got Samuel's house, and you've got Walter's house, and that's it. And that allows these characters time to kind of get to know each other. You see Samuel come out in an apron, and you just kind of assume at that point, since Susanna is a little older than usual, living with her dad, that you can kind of make assumptions right there. Okay, Samuel's wife has passed away. He's an older, loving father who also is kind of a father figure to Walter for the same reason. And it's also pointed out that Samuel's background is in chemistry, not in history. So that's another piece too. That kind of adds to it. So you just get these little pieces that may not make a difference in the story. It doesn't matter that Samuel is a chemistry professor, but I find it interesting because, again, going back to the idea, what would you do if you had all of time to experience? You would probably seek out people in fields that you don't understand or don't know, because you've got plenty of time. Once you've learned every instrument known to man, you're going to have something else to do. So go find a chemistry professor. It makes perfect sense to me that he would seek out these kind of people. I also liked the way Walter does not want to be doing this. I mean, obviously he makes poor choices in trying to marry again for the umpteenth time. But he does it for human reasons. He even says to Samuel, he's like, I tried to leave when I knew that she was starting to be attracted to me. I tried to get out of this situation because, at the end of the day, I'm going to have to break her heart because she's going to die and I'm going to not. But then, I also liked his acting when he turns around and says, but then I fell for her. And at that point, he's going to make a poor decision, which ultimately will end his life. But he does it for the human reasons. I like that too a lot. Yeah,
I mean, it's great that this episode, in the beginning, it points out, the great things about living that long and for that amount of time. But it also, of course, shows the downside. And, of course, getting shot by an elderly ex-wife is one of them. But no, I love the way that the character of Lorette is revealed. It's just this old elderly woman standing in the shadows, and you have no idea who she is at first. And it takes a while for you to kind of figure it out. I love the whole reveal of that. That's another great strength of this episode, the way that they sort of slowly reveal that character.
Agreed. Also, too, just the I like the way that Loretta explains herself, and it's a lot of exposition because she has to point a gun at a guy and blow him away, and we don't know who she is. But she has a lot of things going for her in the fact that obviously she's a woman scorned because she's been left by her husband, and I'm assuming he probably faked his own death. So until she saw the engagement announcement in the paper, she had no way of knowing he was even alive. So when she saw that, she was probably pissed off. But also she explains that it's not just because she is upset that this happened to her. She wants to make sure it doesn't happen to this younger woman again. So she's trying to protect her as well too. And the fact that Walter points out it's Chekhov's gun. You put the gun up on the mantle in Act 1, it has to be fired in Act 3.
Yeah.
Walter points out more so in Act 2 than Act 1 that many a times he has thought about putting that gun to his head and ending it all. And the fact that somebody else makes the choice for him is pretty profound too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's I feel like this episode's really constructed like a play. As I mentioned before, it's very lengthy scenes between just, a couple characters or whatever. It's not, I talked about the last episode being shot kind of like a movie, and there were very cinematic shots and everything. This one's a little more static. It's just filming characters and just sort of letting them be what holds your attention the whole time, and developing their personalities and what they're all about.
Agreed. Anything else that you liked before we moved on to what you didn't?
No, I think I've covered what I liked about it.
Well, let's bash the heck out of it now. What didn't you like?
Well, there's not much to bash. I just, I think that, and it's not really the actress's fault. It's the parts underwritten. I feel like the Susanna character could have been a little more fleshed out. Why? What is it exactly about this woman that attracts someone who's lived as long and has seen it all, like Walter Jameson, to her?
And they really try, because the first thing you hear about, I mentioned how they kind of give you little hints to each of these characters. The first thing they say about Susanna is she's working on her PhD. And she's almost done, and she's got to go study to figure out to defend her dissertation. So she's right there. She's ready to become a doctor like her dad and her future husband. And then immediately Walter says, "Don't worry, you'll be a housewife anyway." It's like, why would you do that?
I know.
Why would you go through school to be a housewife? And then Walter turns it a little bit later on too, when her dad says something. He's like, "Well, you may have to, be the breadwinner for both of us." I'm just like, dude, you've been around for so long. You'd think you would be a little bit more mature in just equality than that. But I guess it is the '60s. You haven't lived through MLK and through you lived through suffrage. Come on, man, let's do this.
Yeah, he did. But yeah, that and then I guess one of the things one of its strengths, but I guess also is you can see, it is a very talky episode and not much happens, but a lot of times those are some of the better episodes of Twilight Zone. So you can't really fault it much for that. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like kind of the build up at the end between Walter and Lorette could have been a little bit more. I don't know, it just kind of happens. But other than that, no, this is a really solid episode for me.
Yeah, I did like that Lorette had a reason to do what she was doing, but I agree with you that it's kind of just like the way stories work sometimes, is you have to have coincidence in order to move the plot along.
Yeah.
It's a pretty weird coincidence that just happens that the night that Walter confesses his true identity to somebody, that his ex-wife kills him that same night. And actually, it actually happens kind of the same way in the other story that, again, I'm going to highlight again because everyone should go see it. It's on YouTube. You can get it for $2. In The Man from Earth, it kind of happens the same way, to where a lot of things happen coincidentally that you think, this dude's been around for a couple thousand years. You'd think this kind of stuff would have happened already, but it's because, the narration has to help us, the audience, kind of figure out what's going on. So I give it a little bit of play, but I agree with you that, you could have had maybe like at the wedding months later or something this happened or whatever, but it's just kind of weird that it all happens in one night. Another thing that I don't like is that very same scene, and it's just because it's cheesy as hell, even for 1960s, is you have Walter aging, which is pretty interesting, pretty cool. He's doing the whole vampire effect where he's just aging really quickly, and he turns into dust. And you've got the pile of dust that's in the shape of Walter in his suit. And Suzanne comes in. Again, let's talk about Susanna being just plain kind of written dumb. She comes in and goes, "What is that?" I'm like, it's a pile of dust with your husband or your fiance's suit on it. You know what that is. Oh, it's just a dust. It's just dust. I'm like, no, it's a man dust. What are you? It's pretty obvious. It's in the shape of a human being. Figure this stuff out.
Yeah. Although I will say for a 1960 TV show, the whole aging process of him is done very well.
Agreed.
The makeup is very good.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because there wasn't much spent in terms of budget on this episode. They had a little bit extra to play with that, and that's a good.
Oh
thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was another recycled set. It's the same. The lobby that he and Samuel are standing in is the same staircase that we've seen in Purple Testament and Elegy.
We'll see him come back and back and back. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's go ahead and get into our scores here, Brandon. For those who are just joining us, welcome. And we score these episodes on 1 to 10. 1 being, and we compare them to other episodes. So a 5 would be an average Twilight Zone episode. A 10 would be some of the greatest episodes of all time, including the first one that both got a 10 for us, and that was Monsters Are Due on Maple Street a few weeks ago. And then 1 is Bewitching Pool. So, Brandon, what would you score Long Live Walter Jameson?
Very, very solid episode that is above average, in my opinion, and yet not the cream of the crop of what we've seen so far. I don't feel it's above average, but it's not cream of the crop. And but some performances that help stand it out, a unique idea. This episode for me, I think, is a 7.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a 7.
And I've been kind of scoring things around that same kind of area when it comes to the higher end ones. It's definitely above average, and I think it deserves to be more than just a 6, which is just above average.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a 7 as well.
Oh, okay.
Which is for me right in there with episodes like Judgment Night and Perchance to Dream. So a really high end episode.
Yeah.
Just not something that's gonna get up there to the upper echelon.
Yeah.
So Brandon, any other concluding thoughts you have about this episode before we go into our plugs?
Just like I said, we're gonna. I really love the way that, even though this episode wasn't written by Rod, I love the way that Twilight Zone plays with history a lot, and we'll see a lot more interesting episodes coming up that use history to great effect. But no, we're rolling along here. We're kind of in the, like I said, we're in the last section of episodes of season 1, and there's some very strong ones still to come, and a lot more interesting ones to talk about. And as we move down a little further and get toward the end of season 1, we'll have to do some kind of end of season 1 wrap up. We'll figure out what that is, but looking forward to that.
I completely agree with you. So you can find us at frontrowmoviereviews.com, and there you can find a link to subscribe to the Zone-i-Sodes feed, which is on its own feed, and then you can also find the main Front Row Movie Reviews feed, which includes my flashbacks, Brandon's classics, our Disney show Beyond the Mouse. We just launched a brand new show, which is a recap of Game of Thrones as they're coming up, and so the recap of episode 2 of season 7 dropped a few days ago. And then also Jeremy is doing, much in the vein of this, he's doing a show that is looking at basically the middle school version of the Twilight Zone, and then it's Are You Afraid of the Dark? So you can see all of those shows and more at the frontrowmoviereviews.com. And Brandon, I'm excited. Next week we're going to have, there's 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. And one of the major people who is in the Twilight Zone is William Shatner. And as of next episode, we will have 1 degree of separation from William Shatner. And that's because our guest next week is going to be Robert Meyer Burnett, who is known nowadays as a member of the geek echelon of culture. He is one of the main co-hosts on Collider Heroes, which I think is actually every day now. So he's on that quite a bit. He's actually going to be hanging out at Comic-Con actually, well, we're recording this mid-July, so he was already at Comic-Con, but he'll be hanging out after he records it. Hooray for time. But also, the reason why I mentioned William Shatner is many of you will know him as the director of a little film from the 1990s called Free Enterprise, which is an amazing little homage to Star Trek and to nerd culture completely. And we're looking forward to having him on the show next week to talk about People Are Alike all over. So,
Yes.
So until then, I have been Scott, and with me is
Brandon Davis.
And we will see you on the couch. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zone-i-Sodes. Zone-i-Sodes is a special presentation of the Front Row Movie Reviews podcast. For more information, go to www.thefrontrowmoviereviews.com.